I'm really sorry about that. We did start just right on 7 o'clock, but something happened and I lost you. So I don't know if you're with me now. But if you can join us, I know there are people joining us from Israel. So a very big welcome to you from Israel and a welcome to all of you from the UK. I'm pleased to be able to meet you all and to say hello. And I know that many of you are tuning in for the first time on this Holocaust. Hello, Becky. We're on live, Becky. I'm back on.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Bye. We've just had a little bit of a problem, and I can see there's only one of you viewing us at the moment. There are 19 booked in to this course, so I want to welcome you anyway, wherever you're from and how wherever you are. I want to welcome you to this Holocaust program that we have prepared for you. And I know that many of you are from different places in the world and also in the UK. And that some of you will have had a lot of experience of Holocaust education, but there will also be those of you who have had no experience of Holocaust education at all. So a big welcome to you all, wherever you're from. The situation is here with regard to this course is that we're doing it from my home, Bethel House in North Wales. And because of social distancing and all the legislation surrounding the coronavirus, there's just myself trying to work the cameras. So I've got Becky, who is our administrator, who booked you into the course, on the phone at her home on the Wirral in England, and she's helping me and telling me what's happening with the numbers of people and whether she can hear me all right. So I hope you can hear me okay, and that you'll enjoy this course. I know some of you have had Holocaust education in the past, and some of you have been on this course with me when we started back in September of last year. But I'm renewing it. I'm starting again so that those of you who are new and who are with us for the first time will get the foundational understanding of the course, and also get some feel of where I'm coming from, because I studied Holocaust at Yad Vashem. I graduated in 2009, and I first went to Yad Vashem and did a month study there under amazing professors, Yehuda Bauer, Robert Wistridge, Franklin H. Little. I studied under Ephraim K. and Steffi K. Some of you know them. And I revisited Yad Vashem, went on various courses and looked at various aspects of Holocaust during that time, and then graduated, having combined a lot of understanding and a lot of information. And since then, I've been trying to pass on that information to as many people as I can. So we've been holding Holocaust memorial services, we've been holding seminars. We've been doing what we can to educate the public, and we're trying our best to try and pass this information on so that it will never happen again. Sadly, anti-Semitism is again on the rise all over the world, but in Europe particularly. And we're seeing anti-Semitism in the States in a new way. So it is important that we actually try and understand a little bit more about Holocaust, and that we pass that on to our children, because they need to understand Holocaust. Now, I'm looking at Holocaust right from the outset, right from the beginning of my understanding about where it started, which is with Christendom and the anti-Semitism in the early years of the church. So I'm going right back to the foundations of Holocaust, but I want us to come to some understanding about where we are with regards to the whole principle of a genocide. Now, Holocaust is a unique genocide. It's not something that has any reference to any other type of genocide. It is absolutely unique, and it's focused specifically on the Jewish people, although other people were victims of Holocaust. There were many other groups of people who were punished, persecuted, and murdered during the period of the Second World War. But we're looking specifically at this targeting of the Jewish people in particular. We will mention the other groups as we go on. Now, I've written a course on a PowerPoint presentation, and what I'm doing is presenting this with my notes on a computer right in front of me. So my eyes do go up and down as I look at the camera and look to you, but I'm also reading my notes. And there's no other way, I understand, of putting this PowerPoint out to you. And I think the best way of presenting is to do it on a presentation like this. If we do it on Skype or Zoom, it becomes a bit cumbersome and difficult. So what I would like you to do, if you wouldn't mind, is to have a pen and paper with you so you can take some notes. And where I think we have need to highlight some issues, I'll let you know, and you can make a note of that, and that will help you as we go along. The number of sessions aren't restricted at all. We look at all aspects of Holocaust, right from Hitler's attitude and where he formulated his hatred towards Jews, and how the church was involved in that, and how that grew, and what happened in Europe during the years prior to the Holocaust. And then we go through the subjects of such as the killing fields, the ghettos, the death camps, and I want to mention here now, if you think to yourself how many death camps and ghettos were there, you will come up with different answers. Some of you may say 6, some of you may say 6,000, but actually the Holocaust War Museum have numbered the number of camps and ghettos at 42,000. And throughout German occupied Europe. So we're looking at a massive subject. I will take the subject from the camps through to some issues such as the transports. We'll look at abortion, we'll look at eugenics in Holocaust, and we'll look at the church and how the church fueled and drove the Holocaust from the point of view of replacement theology and some of the anti-Semitic groups, particularly the German Christian Church. So we have a lot to get through, and I want to just take about an hour of your time each Wednesday night, if I can, if you'll allow me to do that, to present some of the things that you may know about already, but also some of the things that you may not know about at all. And if we're learning and we're finding new information, that's really good for all of us, because Holocaust is an ongoing investigation. We are still finding things out about what happened in Holocaust, and today, after sort of 11 years of solid study since I graduated, I still find new things to learn about what happened in the Holocaust. I want to say, however, I don't understand it. I don't understand how a human being can kill another human being in the most grotesque and awful ways, and even kill babies in the most dreadful ways. And some of the things that we learn about, we won't understand at all. We just have to accept them as fact. And Holocaust is facts. Holocaust is, it did happen. We'll also look at Holocaust denial. And that's why I'm saying Holocaust did happen. The evidence is there. I'm an ex-detective. I look at evidence. The evidence is absolutely there from eyewitnesses, people who suffered, people who made testimony at the time, gave testimony at the Nuremberg trials just after, the testimony of soldiers who went into the camps to liberate them, testimony of people, witnesses who saw what happened in the camps. It happened. Holocaust did take place. It's a stain on humanity that many would like to deny, and certainly the anti-Semitic groups throughout the world deny it. Countries like Iran promulgates Holocaust denial. We have even have clergy in this country who have attended Holocaust denial courses in Iran and conferences in Iran. So people are denying it, but I'll reiterate, it did happen. So I hope you enjoy the course. I hope you enjoy the things that I talk about, and the not that we can enjoy it, but enjoy the learning process. And I think if we can look at Holocaust from the point of view of learning, then we will enjoy the learning process. So please sit back and try and learn as I try and learn as well from myself, and we'll see how far we go with our Holocaust education. And as I said right in the beginning, Holocaust is a genocide. So we must look at the definition of genocide. Even though Holocaust is unique, can't be compared to other genocides, we must accept it is a genocide. And this is what the definition is. The genocide is the deliberate and systematic destruction in whole or in part of an ethnic, racial, religious, or national group. So it's a deliberate, systematic destruction in whole or part of an ethnic, racial, religious, or national group. Well, we know that 6 million Jews were murdered during the 5 years of the Nazi rule. Well, actually, the murder of Jews started before the war started, but it's specifically against the Jewish people. There are other genocides that are recorded in memory, really. There is the 1904 Herero's genocide in Namibia, where 65,000 people were killed. 1916 to 1918, there was over 1 million Armenians killed, murdered by the Turks. That is a genocide. Often that's forgotten, but we must remember that. 6 million in Holocaust. The intended number of those victims was 11 million, however. But Holocaust we're going to look at as a separate genocide, as I've said. 1939 to 1945, there were also 500,000 non-Jewish victims in Holocaust, and we'll look at who those groups are. They ranged from the disabled, mentally ill. They were Germans. We must remember the Russians and Poles who were political prisoners who were arrested and taken to the camps and killed, and also there were Serbs who were murdered in the Croatian camps, and also homosexuals and Freemasons and anybody who offended the Nazi regime. 1975 to 1979, there was 1,700,000 Cambodians murdered, if you remember that. 1994, we see 1 million Rwandans murdered. And in 1992, 1995, there were 250,000 Bosnians killed in Europe, murdered. Again, they were murdered by the Serbs. And I actually was in Bosnia when for part of that time, and saw some things going on in Bosnia that were indicative of hate, causing ordinary people to murder people en masse. So we have that genocide as well. And then 2004 to 2007, we have the genocide in Darfur, 250,000, that's 250,000 people just a few years ago. But the genocide of the Jews, for me, began around the 70 AD. I know that there had been difficulties for the Jewish people with the Egyptians and the Greeks and all these other empires prior to that. But for me, my study begins at 70 AD with the destruction of the temple and the beginning, not of the church, because the church initially was Jewish. And Jesus, Yeshua, as we call him, was a Jew. So I'm not looking at the very first years of the church. I'm looking a bit later on when Jews were murdered en masse in Jerusalem by the Romans, and then those who survived fled to places like Babylon, and the early believers in Yeshua who were Jews and went to the synagogue began to be led by Gentile leaders, and we're going to look at that. And the genocide of the Jewish people began at that time with thousands, 600,000 Jews murdered in Jerusalem by the Romans in 70 AD. There was Masada where Jews were murdered. The Qumran communities fled. There was hatred throughout Europe after the destruction of the temple against the Jews. So if we look at this whole picture of persecution of the Jews, it began in those early years, and of course was led by many of the Gentile church leaders who spoke in terms of hatred against the Jewish people. But we're going to deal with that as we go on. And of course, the hatred came to a height to a point, peaked with the Crusades in the 11th and 12th century. That was a church initiated, and a church or Christendom it caused mass murder of Jews throughout Europe on their way to Jerusalem. We mustn't forget the Inquisition, where Jews were slaughtered in that, but there were many other actions against the Jews that have created this kind of 2,000-year-long genocide against them. And of course, we have the Holocaust, which was the final peak of mass murder of Jews. Although, if we look at an attempt of genocide of the Jewish people, we can see that in 1948 with the establishment of Israel, when the Arab nations, who numbered 45 million in population, attacked a small Jewish population in the state of Israel. 600,000 Jews who had very little to defend themselves with. They were attacked by the Arab nations in an attempt to destroy them, to actually destroy every Jew who was living in Israel at that time. And then we have the 1967 Six-Day War. Again, the Arab nations wanted to destroy the Jewish people again and kill them. And then the 73 Yom Kippur War. So it's like there has been a continuous attempt to destroy the Jewish people right throughout history. Genocide is a process. And what I've imparted to you a little bit is that there was a process that began with the early church, the Gentile leaders who spoke about hatred of the Jews, and they classified the Jews as being people who God hated, which wasn't true. Now that begins something of a process which actually resulted at the end in the Holocaust. And there are 8 stages in this process in a genocide that take place in all genocides, but I want to look at it specifically with regard to Holocaust. So if you've got your pen and paper, you may want to write these down, or you might get them on the internet if you want to. There are 8 stages. So if you click into the internet, 8 stages of genocide, you will come up with a list. Some sites say there are 12 or 10 stages of genocide, and since 2012, most historians say that there were these 10 stages, but I'm going to look at the 8 stages of genocide, and you can study those yourself later if you want to, but just make a note of these. The first one is classification. Classification began with the early church, the early church fathers saying that the Jews were the devil's advocates. They were evil people. They had no souls, etc. And they were classified as being a people who were opposed to God. Well, of course, that's not true, but it classified them in that way. And the second stage of genocide is symbolism. Well, we've symbolized the Jews in many forms. We've depicted them of having large noses. We've depicted them of wearing big tall hats. We put on a yellow star to depict them, to symbolize the Jewish people, and that didn't start with Hitler. That started in 1122 in Oxford with a church council in Oxford. So we've given them symbols which set them apart. They polarize the Jewish people from the rest of the world, and they set them apart. And of course, if you set somebody apart, then you see them as different. So this takes place with this genocide against the Jewish people. Then we have the dehumanization process within the genocide. That's number 3. Dehumanization takes many forms, but let's just give an example here of the dehumanization of the Jews. If we look at the early church fathers again, and we can see that they are called devil's advocates. They are called people who hate God, believers of lies, people who are different, and we could, the early church called them rats and swine and actually dehumanized them. Now, that process is really important in a genocide. It's really important in any type of murder. I dealt with murders while I was a detective, and one of the things that you come to learn about people's behavior and their mindsets is that if they dehumanize an individual or a group of people in their own minds and actually come to believe that that group of people are not human, then it enables them to look at those in a different way and not feel as if they're killing a human being, but feel as if they are killing a non-human, which is far easier to do. We kill animals every day, don't we, for food? When people aren't distressed about that. But you would be if you were killing children every day, although that does happen in abortion. But if we look at this aspect of murder, then people are able to murder people if they have dehumanized them first. And I've seen that happen. So the dehumanizing process is something that we're going to examine as we go through this course. Then the organization is the next stage. This is the 4th stage, organization. Organization is the way we organize the way that we deal with another people group. So in Holocaust, we put the Jewish people in ghettos. We organized, or the Nazis, the European people organized places for Jews to be isolated within communities. They caused this, they organized things in such a way that they were able to begin to think about dealing with their targets in a different way. It was a specific organized process that Nazi Germany put into action so that Jews could be housed in different places and contained. The 5th aspect of it is polarization. Polarization is something that I spoke about it just a few moments ago, but it creates 2 people groups. One, the people group who are hated, and the people group who hate. So in Europe, because of the lies and the anti-Semitism, and we're going to look at all those things, there was an absolute hate against them. So it polarized the people. So they looked at the Jews as somebody they didn't want anything to do with. And that's been the case with every other genocide in history as well. Is that one people group hates another people group. and the next stage is preparation, and this is stage 6. Preparation is exactly what we see in Holocaust, in the form of the ghettos, the rounding up of Jews, the transport of Jews, and we're going to deal with all these aspects separately, which enabled them to be taken to either the killing fields where they were shot in ditches and in the woods and the forests, and taken to specific camps where they were killed, murder camps. And all these things had to be prepared. So Auschwitz was prepared as a first of all a labor camp, really. So, but it was also but Auschwitz too was created and specially built for extermination, as were other places. So we see this preparation taking place, and that's the 6th part of genocide. And then we have the extermination itself, the murder itself. And of course, every genocide has to have that aspect to it, or otherwise it's not a genocide. So extermination has to take place for the 7th stage of genocide to be completed. And clearly in Holocaust, there were so many ways in which ordinary men, women, and children, because they were Jewish, were taken and exterminated, murdered in the cruelest ways imaginable. In fact, we can't imagine some of the situations that Jewish people were put in before they died, before they were murdered by ordinary people, and we're going to look at that aspect. But the 8th aspect is an aspect that interests us today, and that's denial. Holocaust denial is something that I mentioned earlier on that is on the increase. And Holocaust denial is not something which is frivolous. It's not something that we can ignore, although people like to try and ignore it and say, well, how can anybody ignore what happened in Holocaust? So they discard it as something that's not important today, but actually it's really important, because Holocaust denial influences so many people. It influences those who really don't understand, those who are naive, those who really are unable to get into the truth of what happened, and are influenced by people who want to say it never happened at all. I think one of the most popular, not popular, but well-known Holocaust deniers is David Irving. You may have seen him in the film The Denial, which is a story of Deborah Lipstadt, who is a historian in America, who is sued by Irving, who is a Holocaust denier, because he says, you prove the Holocaust took place. You prove that I'm telling lies. And a court case ensued, and a film was made of it, and a book. It's really good to look at that. Irving lost the case in the end, and it wasn't a simple case, and it was a case that was quite heavily involved, and the barrister for the case was a man called Anthony Julius, who was the barrister for Princess Diana during her divorce. Very clever man, an astute man, a brilliant lawyer, and without him, maybe Deborah Lipstadt would have lost the case. But he was wise and he was switched on, and he brought this case to a close. And Deborah Lipstadt won the case in the end, and Irving lost. But Irving is a historian who still speaks today about Holocaust denial. So it is a big problem today. So they're the 8 stages of genocide. Now, how is a genocide actually accomplished in a society which is a modern society, such as Germany, Austria, Poland, Romania, and all the Eastern Bloc countries that were involved in Holocaust, including not only just Eastern Bloc, but including France and Holland, or Netherlands. And how did it happen, and what caused it to happen? We know the processes of genocide now, but it begins really with the teaching of hate. It begins with words. It begins with an attitude. It begins with somebody saying something that influences other people to hate a particular people group, whether it be a large people group or a small people group. It's by teaching hate, and certainly without doubt, the church taught hate towards the Jewish people from 85 AD onwards. The Gentile leaders who begin to take over the early church began to teach against the Jewish people and started to speak in terms of hatred, which influenced others to follow. Then we have this dehumanizing process that takes place that I mentioned about. So the teaching of hate, the words that are used dehumanize the people you're talking about, the people that you oppose. Now, through whom does this teaching take place? Well, ordinary people. If an ordinary person, just a guy in the street like you and I, hears something about a particular people group, then often we formulate an opinion, even if we don't know that people group. Anti-Semitism is one of those things. Anti-Semitism is a hate of the Jewish people by people who often have never met a Jew, who've never lived near a Jewish community, who've never been part of a group involved with the Jewish community. They have no idea what a Jew is like, and no idea who makes up this community of Jewish people. And yes, they formulate an opinion that creates hate. So they go home to their families and they talk about a group of people or an individual they've never met, and they instill hate into their family as well. You've probably come across that, or you've heard about it happening, where people haven't had any relationship with a Jewish person, yet speaks with extreme hatred towards them. So it's ordinary people. Government. Of course, government are very, very influential in setting mindsets of ordinary people. Often what the government says is, or politicians say, are very, very influential, and they have been in history. I mean, what the Nazi Party said about the Jewish people influenced the whole of Europe. But it wasn't only the Nazi Party, the church also did the same. They influenced people, but governments have this strong power to influence another people group. And often leaders will say something about a country, maybe it isn't true, but it actually influences us to think that that country has done or is doing something that is terrible. So government have a huge influence. Within the community, people in authority, not only government or politicians, but police, people in the teaching profession, the education profession, they have massive influence. Councils have huge influence, don't they? They set the scene for what we do and how we treat people, and they create hatred if it's done in the wrong way. And then we have the church or other religious organizations. And I think when we look at Holocaust, there is no denial at all that the church heavily influenced the way people thought in Europe about the Jewish people. And actually, the church in America influenced many people in America. The church in the UK influenced people here as well, but and certainly throughout earlier history, it did. And then we have the church, the German Christian Party in Germany, who has a huge influence on the German people. So all these groups enable the teaching of hatred to change the attitudes and minds of ordinary people. And we're going to look at that and look at the influences on Hitler's life. But also, before we get there, I want to give an example of how ordinary people are so influenced by propaganda, by lies, by hatred, that ordinary men like you and I, and women, can actually kill men, women, and children. And I want to give an example of one of the police battalions that became or part of the Einsatzgruppe movement in Nazi Germany, who were made up of ordinary men who weren't part of the Nazi party, who actually murdered en masse. And we're going to look at the police battalions later on in the course, but as a way of explaining how ordinary people become executioners, murderers in Holocaust, I'll just give you an example of this Battalion 101. You can just make a note of it. You can actually Google 101. I've got quite a lot of documents on Battalion 101, but you can actually Google and you'll get a lot of information on the story of them. But I'll give you a little bit about their history. It was set up in 1939 from police and police reservists. So it was set up from taking volunteers from the police in local communities. Now, I was a police officer, and I know that my promise when I gave an oath right at the beginning was to the protection of life and property, and the prevention of crime and the prosecution of offenders against the peace. That's what my oath was, but the protection of life and property. And the police in Germany were also gave oaths saying that they would protect the community in which they served. But Battalion 101 in 1939 was made up of people like that, and also police reservists. So today in the UK, we would say made up of police wardens or special constables, volunteers. Now, these volunteers were literally what they said they were, is volunteers. They were neither members of the Nazi party. In fact, 101, there were hardly any of them were members of the Nazi party. They didn't have a political view at all. And they were men who had wives and children, and some of them in this battalion worked in banks. Some of them also were part of the education system, and they would be the police reservists who would join the police service to help in the same way special constables do today, as I've said. So now, when they volunteered in 1939 and they were set up then, their first duty, and there was just nearly 500 of these in this one battalion, their first duty was to collect the weapons from the defeated Polish army. So they were to go in behind the soldiers who defeated the Polish army, and they would take the weapons which were left and discarded by the army or seized by the soldiers. So they were a group of men who just simply collected the weaponry and looked after the security of the weapons. Then in 1940, this is a brief history. In 1940, they were ordered to guard Lodz Ghetto. So they were guards. So that's what their job was. They were in uniform. They were there to guard and stop Jews leaving the ghetto and make sure that the ghetto was run properly. And they used Jewish leaders inside the ghettos to look after the day-to-day running of the ghettos. But they were guards there making sure that the ghetto was sealed. That was in 1940. So they weren't soldiers. They weren't out there to kill. 1942, they were reformed again from middle-class, working-class men with an average age of 39. What happened after Lodz Ghetto? They were called back to Germany, to their homes in Hamburg, Bremen, and various other places in Germany. They went back to their families, but they were reformed again in 1942. And this time they weren't police reservists or policemen. They were working class men who were their average age was 39 years. Some would be 45, some would be 36, 37. Married men, many of them, family men, again, bankers. They worked in the education, they were teachers, they were ordinary men that worked in the municipalities, the councils, and in their cities. Some of them were farmers as well. So they were reformed into this unit, and they were sent back out um, to do this military service. Now, they numbered at this time, 1942, 486 men altogether in this one particular police battalion. And by the way, there were a number of police battalions. This is just one, probably the most well-known. The majority of these men had no aspirations in politics at all, no aspirations within the Nazi party. And they just went as a unit, not to fight, but to do the things that we've just spoken about. However, on the 13th of July, 1942, they were ordered to round up and shoot 1,800 Jews, men, women, and children from Josipho, that's in the Ukraine. Only 12 of these men refused. Now, one of the things that's often said about the police battalions, the people who murdered Jews, is that, you know, if they'd have refused, then they'd have been shot. Well, actually, when you examine the Einsatzgruppen and the police battalions and those people who were involved in the murders of Jews, you find that actually that is not true. Now, 12 of this unit, 101, refused to shoot the Jews at point blank range. They were ordered to kill these 1,800 Jews from this one town, but 12 refused, and they were not punished. The thing about it was that they were not in any way punished at all. They were given the option of shooting or not. 12 said no, and it's not many, 12 out of 486, is it? Really, and they just went, and some of them were promoted and went to other places. Some just were used in 101, but not as killers. Now, in 3 years, this battalion, this one police battalion, was responsible for the direct shooting of 6,500 Jews. Now, this is ordinary men like you and I. I mean, I'm a bit old now to be called into any kind of police battalion. I'm 65, but if your age is about 40 to 45, you're an ordinary guy. You're living on the Wirral, perhaps. Your life is fine with you. You never thought of killing anybody. Yet within 12 months, you've been trained, you've been conditioned, you've been led to believe that Jews are a danger to society and a danger to Europe, and actually are not human. And you've joined a police battalion, and you're partly responsible for the shooting of 6,500 Jews. How does that happen? They also were responsible for the murder of 1,000 Jews. So they didn't just the rural areas to look for Jews, and they shot them when they found them. These are ordinary men. They killed 30,500 Jews in Majdanek and Pernatua, which were death camps. They became part of the killing units within the death camps as well. Ordinary men. They weren't demons. When they started, they were ordinary guys from the communities like we are. And yet they killed people in the death camps. They rounded up 48,000 Jews and put them on trains to their deaths in Treblinka. 101 were responsible for that. And this battalion of less than 500 civilians, 486, as I've said, were directly responsible for the death of over 83,000 Jews. That's unimaginable in just a very, very short space of time. So we're going to look at the background of Germany, but how this process took place. And over the next few weeks, I hope you will learn with me as we go on into this process and just see how ordinary people were influenced into such a situation where they could kill men, women, and children at point blank range. Before we get there, I want to look at some of the facts about Germany itself and the Jewish people in Germany so we can get a bit of background. Now, Jews had lived in Germany for over 1,000 years. And that's really important. They were part of the fabric of the German community. They were ordinary working people. They were lawyers as well. They were bankers. They were people who shopkeepers. They were people who made the shoes. They were artisans in making all sorts of products. They were ordinary people who worked in very menial tasks and places, but they were also in the medical profession and the professions as well. But they were part of the fabric of the German community. But they were only less than 1% of the total number of Germans in Germany in 1933. So a very small population of Jews. And I guess if we look at it in terms of the UK, and I know most of you are from the UK, we have about 70 million people living in the UK at the moment, and there are only 330,000 Jews. So you get a picture of how small the Jewish community is, like it is in Germany. But yet anti-Semitism in the UK is really high. So anti-Semitism was the same in Germany, but far higher against this 1% of the population. What could 1% of the population do to harm anybody? Illogical. Many Jewish men had fought as well in the First World War. So a lot of Jews had gone and fought in the war to increase the German vision of a bigger Reich, if you like, and they'd fought in the war and given their lives. And some of those who survived the war were given medals and awarded appraisals because of their work in the army and what they did to fight on behalf of Germany. So they were dedicated to Germany. Now, in the general election in 1932 in Germany, 37.2% of the vote went to the Nazi Party. So the Nazi Party then didn't get an overall majority as such. It did, but it wasn't. Not everybody voted for the Nazi Party. Only 37.2%. So it wasn't an overwhelming victory for the Nazi Party. Now, by 1935, the Nazi Party had put into process this huge propaganda campaign against the Jewish people. And they produced on a paper called the Die Stürmer, and it was published weekly. And they published in 1935, they were publishing 480,000 copies a week of this publication. Now, if we look at it in terms of the UK and what publications are there in the UK, I'm trying to get you to understand and compare the circulation of the Cosmopolitan magazine in 2006. Not that I buy that. In the UK was 475,000. So it's like it was as common as the magazine Cosmopolitan. But the Die Stürmer was particularly anti-Semitic and caused people to absolutely hate the Jewish people. And we'll look at some of the publications later on. I'm just giving you background. In the 1939 census in Germany, we see that the population in Germany was 79.7 million. So it was just about 10 million more than the UK is today. But that included Austria and annexed parts of Czechoslovakia. And that was in 1939. This is after Germany walked into Austria. So in 1929, going back again, factories all over Germany were closing down and businesses were collapsing because of the state of the economy. 6 million people were unemployed in Germany, so it gives you a bit of a picture. Many families lived in poverty and many relied on charity. There was anger at the way in which the country was being governed, and they were also angry at the payment to international countries of 6.6 billion as compensation for what Germany had done in the First World War. So Germany were paying the British people and France and Belgium compensation for what they'd done in the First World War, and that was 6.6 million. And the German people were really cross about that, and particularly because they were poor. In 1932, Germany was completely democratic, so it was not run. Hitler was not didn't have the power of a dictator at that time. It was democratic, and men and women had the vote. There was freedom of speech in 1932, which wasn't the case later on under the Nazi control. There was violence on the streets between Nazi stormtroopers and communists. There was a real hatred of communists because in Russia, Russia had taken over, the communists in Russia had taken over their communities and had actually taken away the rights of many of the capitalists. And that's what Germany feared. And they feared communism. And they believed as well that most Jews were communists or Bolshevists. So the Nazi stormtroopers who were on the streets in Germany actually attacked and targeted their hatred on communists, but also on Jews. Most Germans feared communism because they'd seen communism eradicate democracy in Russia. And Jews were perceived to be part of this communist movement. Now, I'm going to take us forward now to 1935. The Nuremberg laws in 1935 were created by the Nazi Party in Germany, and they were introduced on the, they were introduced on the 15th of September 1935 by the Reichstag at an annual Nuremberg rally of the Nazi Party. So there's the Reichstag were a group of influential politicians within the Nazi Party. There were two main parts of the Reich citizenship law. The Nuremberg laws were citizenship laws, basically. The first part of the laws were in respect of the following. And it said this, it said, anyone who enjoys the protection of the Reich is considered to be a subject of it and is therefore obligated to the Reich. Nationality is determined by the Reich and state nationality laws. That was the first part of it. The second part was that you had to have German blood to be part of the Reich, and you had to have proof of that. Now, this is really important because the focus on German blood, Aryan blood, was very important to the Germans. Now, we think that it was an idea created by the German people, by the Nazi Party, don't we? But actually, that concept was created in America in the early 1900s, late 1800s and early 1900s, when the American eugenicists taught and actually spoke openly about wanting a pure Nordic race. Now, the Nordic race and the Aryan race in terms of the eugenicist is exactly the same. You know, tall, blonde, blue eyes, Aryan blood, although the Americans refer to it as being Nordic blood. And they were trying to, America and Germany were trying to purify their blood for a white supremacy race who would lead the world. Now, you may say, well, Hitler created that idea from his own mind, but he didn't, because in 1923, when he was writing Mein Kampf, and we're going to look at Mein Kampf on this course. When he wrote Mein Kampf, he wrote to the American eugenicists who were talking about and writing about this pure Nordic blood, and asked them for information on how this could be attained and how they could reach that level of purity. So when the Nuremberg laws were put into place, this was actually a vision of not only Germany, but also American eugenicists. The second part of the Nuremberg laws also said that there had to be a certificate to show citizenship. So you had to say you were pure Aryan blood, and you had a certificate to say that you were. And only Reich citizens, that is, people considered to have pure Aryan blood, only Reich citizens could have full political rights. Now, Jewish blood was considered to be something that tainted Aryan blood, and that whole concept helped formulate the genocide that was to take place, and the segregation of the Jews in those early years, even before the war. Now, Section 1 of the Nuremberg laws said this: marriage between Jews and nationals of German or kindred blood are forbidden. Marriages concluded in defiance of this law are void, even if, for the purpose of evading this law, they are concluded abroad. So marriages between Jews and citizens of the Reich was banned. Now, where did that concept come from? Again, that came from America, because the Americans were wanting to, and actually they did try and achieve it in some places, wanting to stop marriage between white Americans and black Americans. And also they tried to stop marriage between Italians, white Americans and Italians, and Jews as well. And also the people of a lower class. They believed, the Americans believed, that the upper classes should not marry the lower classes, as the lower classes' blood would taint the blood of the upper classes. So that concept was carried through into Nazi Germany, and it eventually manifests in this law that said it's illegal for marriages to take place between Jews and German Aryans who had the pure blood, and the Jews had this tainted blood. That was what the idea was. Number 2 in Section 1 is proceedings for the annulment of these marriages could be initiated by the public prosecutor. So if I'd married an Aryan, I was a Jew, and I married an Aryan of an Aryan lady who was blonde, blue eyes, etc., etc. But I was Jewish, of a low working class background, then the public prosecutor could actually call for my marriage to be annulled based on those things. Section 2 said that the relationship outside marriage between Jews and nationals for German or kindred blood was forbidden. And Section 3, Jews will not be permitted to employ female nationals of German or kindred blood in their households. Now, the thinking behind that was quite obvious, really, that an Aryan maybe cleaning a house for a Jewish professor or doctor may have sexual relations with him, and therefore that would taint the blood, the Aryan blood. So that was prevented under the Nuremberg laws. And then we see in Section 4, and I'll finish with the Nuremberg laws tonight, but Section 4 says Jews are forbidden to hoist the Reich and national flag and to present the colors of the Reich. Can you see how this polarization is taking place here? Number 2 of Section 4 says, on the other hand, they are permitted to be present, to present the Jewish colors The exercise of this authority is protected by the state. Section 5 says, a person who acts contrary to the prohibition of Section 1 will be punished with hard labor. So if you, as a Jew, refused to comply, you were imprisoned and went to hard labor, and camps like Dachau had started to be built then, so that political prisoners, people who objected against this Jews, were arrested and taken away. Number 2 of Section 5 says a person who acts contrary to the prohibition will be punished with imprisonment and hard labor. So that's what I just said now, isn't it? Number 3 of Section 5 says a person who acts contrary to the provisions of Section 3 or 4 will be punished with imprisonment up to 1 year and with a fine with one of these other penalties. And the hard labor was the penalties. And then the laws continue to punish and persecute the Jews and separate them and polarize them from the rest of the community. Now, when that was in 1935, that was 2 years after Germany came to power, because Germany came to power in 1933. And at that time, Jews were living in every country in Europe. There was a total of over 9 million Jews who lived in countries that would be occupied by Germany during World War II. And by the end of the war, 2 out of every 3 of these Jews would be dead. So 2/3 of European Jewry were killed during the Holocaust. And that's the 6 million that we're going to discuss in the next few weeks of this course. Now, I hope you've been able to learn something from tonight. If you haven't learned anything, if you know that information, I hope I've been able to reinforce that information for you and help you to get a picture of the background, because we need to understand the background. And next week, I'm hoping to be able to look at how the attitude of Hitler's attitude towards Jews was created and how it was formulated in him as a young man, and how it was reinforced by his parents and the people who surrounded him, the people who he really admired. And we'll look at that aspect of Holocaust, and we look at the background of the church as well. So thank you for being with me tonight. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you're looking forward to the next course, because if we learn something, we can pass it on to our children and say, hey, we've learned this tonight, or we've learned this, and try and help them to respond in a way that will prevent the hatred of the Jewish people in the future, particularly in our own nation here in the UK. So I want to say good night and Lila Tov to you all, and bless you, and I'll see you next Wednesday at 7 o'clock. God bless. Bye.